Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is Black Sites, a Delta Green role-playing game by Arc Dream Publishing. In this video I'll be covering the 7th scenario in the book, Oblivione. Before we begin, it's worth explaining what the Latin title means. The word Oblivione on its own means forgotten, and the prefix in this context means completely or utterly. The importance of this title will become clear later on. Okay, first a bit of history. Released in October 2019, Oblivione is a 30-page standalone scenario that is available as a PDF and print on demand. It's worth also pointing out that this was not part of any of the successful Delta Green Kickstarters. There'll be spoilers from this point on, so stop watching now if you intend to play this. The scenario begins in the small town of Mustang, Arizona, a place not near anywhere except the now abandoned Naval Medicine Annex Yuma, where the people of the town once worked. The highway bypasses the town, though it still manages to cling to life. 636 people live here working for the Marine Corps publications. It's a place of emptiness where few leave. Something that once lived in a tank at the Naval Medicine Annex has stirred, and evil is now haunting the area, having seeped into the bones of the people who live in the town. The locals are unaware of it, but deep down there is a familiar feel to it. It watches what they do and makes them sometimes do horrible, horrible things, punishing them at its whim. The town was founded in 1930 in southwest Arizona, just over a kilometre from Yuma and Naval Medicine Annex Yuma, which closed in 1947 and has been reclaimed by the desert. Between 1929 and 1947, the base held the prisoners who were captured in an infamous raid on Innsmouth in 1928. Since 1945, the town has been the base of Marine Corps Publications Inc., a company that prints periodicals and the like for the USMC, with most people in the town being employed by them somehow. On June the 2nd, a private Homer Ryan, a Marine stationed as a clerk at the local air station, came home to find his entire family ritualistically murdered. It is believed he entered the house at around 8:41 p.m, was ambushed and killed after a struggle. It was only on June the 4th when 2 employees of Depcor Carpet Cleaning arrived at the house to find the door ajar and 2 coyotes fleeing the scene that the bodies were discovered. 3 women, 2 men and an infant were dead and had been gnawed on. Police were instantly called, and the Yuma Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit descended on the place, cataloguing everything, though few leads were found. The victims were Daniel and Sandra Abril, 45 and 46 respectively, their daughter Sierra Abril, 17, Grace Wright, 66, the mother of Sandra, Private Homer Ryan, 21, and Beth Ryan, the daughter of Homer and Sierra, aged just 5 months. They were all stabbed at least 60 times each, with the lips, eyelids and ears removed, and strange striated marks were carved into their limbs after death. A grim discovery indeed. Also, words had been scratched into the drywall of the living room. They said, "Home Dagon, home Yanathle, sea to the sea." Some of the Yuma police were aware that Dagon was a fish-tailed god of fertility and agriculture from the Bible that was worshipped by the Philistines, but that is all. There were no witnesses, clues or leads. The police are looking for a drifter as nothing else makes sense, and as soon as it hit the wire for other police departments, it was flagged by Delta Green. The truth of the matter goes back to the raid on Innsmouth in 1928, where it was discovered that 209 humans had interbred with creatures from the ocean and were thus seized and vanished into various naval facilities. This was deemed to be a huge mistake, as within days there was murder, insanity and escape attempts. In 1929, all of the prisoners were consolidated into one newly acquired site in Arizona, Flyfield. This was called Yuma Yucca Lot 2 in reports, or YY2. The place was a proposed refuelling point for the Akron-class airships, though this ended up not working out and was a ramshackle collection of tin shacks. The isolatory nature that it lended made it the perfect place for the strange prisoners. They hated the high temperatures and escape was nigh on impossible. The place grew into a concentration camp surrounded by guard towers and barbed wire. In 1930, the P4 desk, Parapsychology, Paranormal and Psychic Phenomena, a precursor to Delta Green from Naval Intelligence, was given the task of dealing with the Innsmouth hybrids, the deep ones, and as such, Naval Medicine Annex Yuma was built. Within the annex, the prisoners were subjected to 1930s scientific testing, where they were exposed to disease, chemicals and weapons. In 1936, 9 live vivisections were performed, and results showed disturbingly, and others were something else entirely. A particular prisoner, Albert L. Marsh, was considered one of the leaders and psychologically tested, deprived of food and water and kept awake for long periods while being endlessly questioned and having electrical shocks. It was discovered that he and his family were the backbone of the community, running something called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. As time went by, the prisoners descended into madness, begging for the ocean, then into the torpor in the saltwater tanks they were contained in. In 1938, the only escape from the facility happened. Albert L. Marsh was missing from his tank that had been bolted from the outside, and the 5-inch glass windows were unbroken. He was never found. Unbeknownst to P4, Marsh was a 144-year-old sorcerer who enacted a plan to escape using hypergeometry, which would destroy his body. He lives on as a presence that manifests occasionally and forces its will on humans and animals of the area. He's tried to take revenge on those that worked at the Annex, causing them to commit random bizarre crimes such as the murder at the Abril home. In recent years, Marsh's presence and power has grown for some reason, and he has been acting out his revenge fantasies. Marsh, awaiting Oblivion, hopes to cause a great conflagration of such potency that it will stir his inhuman master, Dagon. It is building to the summer solstice of the 21st of June where Mustang will burn. Importantly, we have some notes on when the summer solstice occurs on 21st of June instead of the 20th, those years being 2016, 2020 and 2024. The structure of the mission has been designed to put the agent in the worst case scenario, though it begins with a mystery to lure them towards something that appears a lot, dare I say, tamer in Yuma, Arizona. The mission essentially has 6 steps. Number 1, they arrive in Yuma and begin investigating the Abril house. Number 2, they search the home, dig into the details and talk to people, which should reveal children's footprints and bike tracks that lead to the Annex. 3, the agents search the Annex and hopefully reach out to their contacts to find more out about the base. 4, Marsh psychically invades one of the investigators, which uncovers every single detail of their life and Delta Green that they know. Marsh then becomes obsessed and focuses on them. 5, Marsh draws them to Mustang. And 6, the ritual occurs, with almost half of the townsfolk under Marsh's control becoming violent. There is fire, explosions, torture and murder, with the town turning on itself in an orgy of death and depravity in a ritual to reach out to Dagon. The agents are the guests of honour. So with that in mind, let's move on to their arrival. Delta Green are first triggered into action by the words Dagon and Yanath Lay, and this could easily be the program or the Outlaws. With the program, it is picked up by an algorithm created to do such things, and the mention of Deep Ones is brought to the attention of the director. Within 10 hours, a team is on its way to Yuma with a clear mandate of identifying, locating and destroying the threat. They arrive on the evening of June the 6th, and the director is aware of YY2. If it comes via the Outlaws, a contact named Ivan Serrano, a retired friendly who lives in Arizona, was shown the case files by a friend as he has a reputation of being someone with occult knowledge. He heard the name Dagon once on an operation read from a 550-year-old book, and as such reached out to his old Delta Green contacts. The outlaw mandate is to stop the threat and not get caught. They arrive on June the 11th. We then move on to the Abril house. Built in 2015, it is on the edge of the Desert Sunrise Estate, with open facings to the Arizona State Route 195. Most of the surrounding houses are in a state of construction. Daniel Abril bought the house after selling a chain of car washes he owned. After construction, he called the house Shangri-La, even having a metal plate made for the front walk. They moved in on January the 2nd and died on June the 2nd. Agents from the program will have much easier access to the house, as they will have authentic but false ID provided upon the agent's requests, though any investigation into these will cause it to fall apart quickly. They've been cleared as part of an FBI task force linking the murders with international drug trafficking, with the chief agreeing to give them a wide berth. They will have full run of the house and to the case files. Their contact there is Senior Detective Julia Reardon. The Outlaws, on the other hand, have a number of illegal ways to enter the house. They have the option of using their real badges to bluff their way into the crime scene if they have them, though this can easily arouse suspicion. They can create fake credentials with the right roles and even pull strings to gain access, and even bribe their way in. The other real option is to sneak onto the property at night, though there are police officers stationed outside, so they need to be careful. Gives a box out explaining the process that should be followed should the agents get exposed. Next, we move on to the house itself. We have a map of it here, and it goes on to describe the details. The outside of the house is protected by a wrought iron fence, and the yard is sandy dirt with small shrubs, birds of paradise and cacti. When the lights are on in the evening, anybody can see in the house. A search of the outside of the house reveals something that the police missed. A series of small footprints in the northeast corner that are dried into the soil surrounding a bird of paradise due to it having been watered recently. They can be examined with forensics and determined to be Nike sneakers of size 6.5. This matches no resident of the house. The desert across from the house on Route 195 is sand and dirt over a flat, open vista. This was only given a tertiary search by the police. If the agents search, after around 2 hours they find several sets of bicycle tracks side by side within sight of the house. It looks to be 3 riders pulled up alongside each other. Unfortunately, the tracks fade into the desert if followed, but go in a straight line. If this is pursued, after around 1.4 kilometres it leads to the Annex. If the tracks are forensically examined, they are made by various children's bicycles available throughout the American Southwest. Once inside the house, there are a number of things that can be discovered. It's still an active crime scene, and as such the front and side porch are covered in police tape and paper, with plastic bins for shoe covers being present. The house is a ruin. Dry blood is all over the place and there are evidence markers everywhere. For each hour that they examine the home, they get a roll on various skills. An anthropology roll under 40% will reveal that the already known information about Dagon, that being that he is an old god, supposedly with the body of a man and the lower half of a fish. A criminology roll under 40% will show that those who committed the murders cared little for covering up their tracks. A forensics roll under 40% shows that there were multiple killers and at least one was under 35 kilos and 1.5 metres tall. Also, the murder weapons were taken from the kitchen and they gained access via the back patio door. They can also discover that the fingerprints are not on any databases and that the victims were disabled and likely murdered in front of the other victims. A human roll under 40% shows that searching computers and the like brings up nothing. They can find out that Homer was a faithful and honest member of the household and the family lived comfortably. A search roll under 40% will show that Homer was killed downstairs and the rest upstairs, and that when the infant was killed, 4 people stood with their backs against the north wall and that they were all between 1.1 and 1.4 metres tall. A search skill of 80% or higher will discover a number written inside an open closet door in blood, 197. Those with an unnatural of 20% or higher that pass their roll will understand the link between Dagon, Yanathle and Deep Ones. There is, however, one important thing that has not been discovered. 2 months earlier, Sierra had bought a teddy bear fitted with a nanny cam and set it up to monitor the babysitter, though it was quickly forgotten as it was not used. It's currently in the nursery and triggers every time someone enters if they come within 2.5 metres of it for a 5-second burst. The internal drive holds 5 clips. The first 4 are normal home behaviour, however, the 5th one gives a chilling clue. It is dated June the 2nd and shows an unknown white girl around 8 to 10 years old coming into the room naked and covered in blood. In her hand she holds the slaughtered infant. This is horrifying and of course, sand draining. The Yuma police found 4 possible witnesses and as such required the agents to have access to a cop working the case or the case files. The first is Sean M. Rosen, a roofer who was nearby on the days leading up to the murders. He saw the family coming and going up until the 2nd of June and also saw kids riding bikes out in the desert to the north, described as a couple of boys and a girl around 12 years old. There's Julie N. Maxwell, a masseuse who, while leaving a client at around 5:50 p.m. on June the 2nd, saw 4 children near the house on bikes. There is Lon Strobel, construction foreman working Palmer Avenue, who found a BMX abandoned on the worksite and retrieved it and left it on the edge of the street. It was gone later on when he returned. The last witness is Gilberto D. Cameron, a mail carrier who reported someone setting off fireworks and firing M80s in the desert to the northwest. After this, we move on to the autopsies. These were performed by Dr. Albert P. Norris, an experienced physician. They were extensively photographed and are by far the most violent and horrific that the doctor has ever seen. Should the agents be able to get a hold of the autopsy report, they can find out some important information. An anthropology or occult roll of 40% will show that the removal of the eyelids and the carving into the skin of gills and scales are rites of a Stone Age culture from the South Pacific and are associated with an unnamed fish man god. A criminology roll of 40% will reveal that the murder weapon was wielded by someone not used to doing so and that multiple implements were bent or broken at the scene. Daniel Abril had a knife blade trapped between 2 of his ribs. A forensics roll of 40% will show that the earliest injuries were caused on the lower part of the body and the blood spatters indicate the victims fell to the floor. One of the attackers bled at the scene, though was blood type O. A human roll of 40% will show that Homer and Sierra had defensive wounds, indicating that they attempted to block the attacker and run. At this point, the evidence should definitely be pointing in a direction that doesn't bear thinking about for the agents. After this, we shift attention to the Naval Medicine Annex. Around 1.4 kilometres southeast of the Apple House, the Annex is a large ruined cement building covered in graffiti. All the windows are shattered and it is full of the kinds of things that these abandoned places contain: alcohol bottles, cigarette stubs and used condoms, and it reeks of urine. It is built in a U shape and was once imposing, but now collapsed ceilings have exposed the lower levels. Bike tracks can be found in abundance here, heading in many directions. After searching for a number of hours, the agents can determine that the place is still well travelled, with footprints and handprints everywhere. Fingerprints taken from this scene will show that they match one of the unknown sets at the Apple House. Those that search and pass an occult roll can find the word Dagon and Hydra drawn in large letters that cover an entire wall. The word Yanathle is drawn in a mural showing an odd, vast underwater city filled with ghostly blue lights. If someone takes a sample from one of the fresher urine stains, they can identify that the person it belonged to has an abnormally high creatine level, which could be used to identify them. Further searching can uncover more clues. There are animal bones scattered around the site, and those with the right skills can determine that at least a dozen of them have met violent death by humans being ritualistically slain. In the sub-basement, they will find the least travelled part of the annex. There is a huge room with 344 glass containers around the size of a king-size bed that are made of wrought iron and 4-inch glass. One of the tanks is labelled 197 and is painted like a shrine in blue, red, yellow and green. Should the agents stake out the annex, it will eventually pay off. 3 children will arrive on bikes from the northwest, the direction of the town of Mustang. They're under the influence of the marsh spirit. They are 11-year-old Eve Bright Warnos, a small blonde girl who carries a teddy bear, the girl on the nanny cam; Rodrigo Callis, a 13-year-old boy whose sneakers match the prints found at the Apple House. He has a cat in a camping backpack that is trying to break free; and Alexander Leniski, a short, thin 14-year-old boy. All of their fingerprints were found at the house. If followed, they will make their way to the shrine tank in the sub-basement and proceed to rip the cat to shreds while chanting in unknown words. At this point, there are some considerations to have with regard to the children. They look harmless and confused if they are approached before the cat is killed, which will provide an instant where they can lunge for weapons, even the agent's own guns. If the agents shoot a child, the sand loss is fairly hefty, and all of them are far stronger than they should be, and they are incredibly well coordinated, which aids them in combat. Additionally, when they confront the children, Marsh's spirit notices the agents and tries to read the one with the lowest power score. Should the agents capture the kids, they become catatonic. They have no ID, and the only record of their fingerprints is that they were found at the Apple House. They are not the subject of missing children reports, and a blood test will show they have heightened levels of creatine. Once Marsh has read one of the agents, the children will stop coming to the annex. If by some method the children end up giving a lead back to Mustang, then Marsh makes them commit suicide in various gruesome methods in order to stop the agents from following the trail. Should the agents do some research into the annex, they can discover a few things, much of which was discussed at the beginning of the scenario. However, in addition, they can track down a few people that used to work there: Peter Delgado, Ophelia Winters, and Luisa Perez. In addition to this, they can find out that the annex was used to treat tuberculosis, though the names of the patients are not recorded anywhere, and on the 25th of April 1938, a manhunt was launched for an escaped prisoner, an Albert Marsh, whose photograph was circulated in Yuma. This can be found on microfiche in the archives of the Yuma Sheriff's Office. They can discover that Mustang, Arizona was founded for employees of the annex and that the place was shut down in 1947. It then moves on to the living former workers. The first detailed is Peter Delgado. A spry 100-year-old, Delgado resides at the Yuma Sunset Retirement Home. He worked as an orderly at the annex. He heard some crazy things while there. One rumour is that the prisoners were cessationists that fired on the National Guard and had some crazy religion. He was there when Albert Marsh escaped and had no idea who he was, but will freely share that his patient number was 197. He says that all of the patients there seemed to be inbred and sickly with bulging eyes and rickets, and that they spoke with an odd drawling accent. Most of what he did was fetch water for them, as they had an almost unnatural thirst. The next person to talk to was Ophelia Winters. She's 99 years old and lives with her 61-year-old granddaughter in Vermont. She'll explain that it was not a tuberculosis ward, and is almost certain that chemical weapons were researched there. She saw the basement with its huge tanks filled with water. She also recalls one of the patients, Eve Granmuth, would talk about the devil reef. She was covered in what looked like chemical burns, and her legs were misshapen with tumours, and she had bug eyes. She dated one of the doctors who worked there, though he was suddenly transferred to New Mexico, telling her that the research at the annex was moving to be on a much wider scale. The last living worker is Luisa Perez. She is a 99-year-old retired clerk who lives in Albuquerque. She saw very little out of the ordinary, though did note that there seemed to be 2 lists of patients, one with American names and one with Spanish names. She remembers that many doctors and nurses would go to the basement, though she never saw it. In a box out here, it gives some information on Devil Reef and Innsmouth, should the players research into it. With the right kinds of skills, they can find out many snippets of information on the raid on Innsmouth that was the catalyst of the birth of Delta Green. Okay, next we move on to the final part of the scenario, the killing floor. It provides us with some information that the players can get should they ask Delta Green about Innsmouth. If they contact the program, they are met with a solid rebuff. If they pursue it, they could even get a call from the director himself. If they contact the Outlaws, they get a series of reports from different generations that gives the agents reading them +1 to their unnatural skill. They can discover that P4, the precursor to Delta Green, ran the Annex and that the prisoners were wrong. They had anomalous biology and some had functioning gills, occasionally referred to as deep ones in the files. Between 1939 and 1942, Delta Green took over the deep one research from the ONI. 3 actions are noted, including Operation Lifeguard. They can also discover that the Annex was not closed but moved to somewhere unknown in New Mexico. It was called YY2 and also the Ice Cave. So continuing on, we learn that the spirit of Marsh has been preparing for a final ritual of violence and death before it leaves our dimension, maybe forever. It has begun building a shrine to Dagon in an old abandoned theatre in Mustang, the Isaldo. On the 21st of June, the summer solstice, Marsh plans to wipe out Mustang to appease his foul master. Should the agent that Marsh read know of Delta Green, P4, the Annex, Innsmouth or anything else unnatural, then he becomes obsessed with them, starting to plot revenge for Innsmouth. Worse than that, Marsh knows all of their secrets. Everything. He directs the people of Mustang to lure them in, torture them and ritually sacrifice them on the summer solstice. Marsh has a few methods of doing this. The first thing he does is to dispatch some of his puppets across the country and seize one of the agent's bonds, kidnapping them and bringing them to Mustang or even faking a phone call or email to lure them there. If multiple agents are read, multiple bonds are taken hostage. The night of June the 20th, the agents will receive a call from a terrified and weeping hostage, even if they are using a burner phone. A harsh voice with a New England accent tells them to come to the movie theatre in Mustang. They have to make a sand roll, and if they fail, they must head out there. Any captured children will suddenly talk about the bad man who made them kill Abrils, even calling him Albert L. Marsh. By a strange coincidence, there is a person called Albert L. Marsh that lives in the area, though he is a 65-year-old air conditioning repairman and has no idea what is happening. If the agents are led on by one of the children, they will be taken to the Isaldo. The Marsh spirit has the power to contact the agents via telephone or even email. His voice is harsh, and he will tell them that he knows they are looking for him. He will happily say that he escaped from the Annex in 1938 and has hid in Mustang unnoticed since. If they enter the town, it'll be pretty normal until they try to leave. It also gives us a box out of what happens if they arrive in Mustang early. We then move on to Mustang itself. It's a small town of 636 residents with just a few streets and an open desert. It has a grade school, though almost all of the kids here are homeschooled, which is not unusual in remote towns. It's pretty small change in the grand scheme of things. It has a single road that runs to it, Akron Road, which turns into 6th Avenue. There is a diner, a general goods store, a grocery store and a stationery store, in addition to 2 closed storefronts. The streets are small with 1 or 2 storey houses. The Marine Corps Publications building is a 3-storey facility to the southwest. Currently, Marsh controls around half of the townsfolk and can see, experience and manipulate them at will. The people in town who are not possessed by Marsh were either born before the spirits had coherence or from outside of Mustang. Leading up to the 21st of June, even those locals who are not possessed start noticing that something is wrong. Marsh is, however, fully aware of this and has plans for these people. To the bystander, Mustang is a normal backwater town with the school and the Marine Corps buildings appearing busy. Those agents who are suspicious and make the right kind of rolls will get the feeling that they are being watched, though no amount of searching will turn up why they feel like this. Should they break into one of the homes here, they make a look roll. Successful rolls show a normal home. Failed ones find the house filthy, mouldering and piled with ammunition and explosives. A fumble means that they are confronted by a Marsh puppet, which kicks off the Battle of Mustang. More on that in a bit. The next focus is the Isaldo Theatre. It closed in 1968 and was abandoned until recent times. The interior was stripped of its original seating in 1974. However, in the last few months, Marsh's puppets have begun constructing a large wire and plaster effigy of Dagon. If the agent entered the Isaldo, then it kicks off the Battle of Mustang. The effigy itself is in several pieces for easy removal to the outside. Once assembled, it is a 6-metre tall statue of a fish-headed creature with a tail and arms of a man with its hands raised to the sky in supplication. Any hostages that the puppets kidnapped are held at the theatre. They'll be sacrificed at the climax of the ritual and are watched by shotgun-wielding guards. Next, we move to the climax of the scenario, the Battle of Mustang. It stresses that once it begins, it's unlikely to end peacefully or swiftly, as Marsh believes it is his final chance at revenge and will stop at nothing to capture, torture and kill the agents. As soon as a single shot is fired, around 20 townsfolk start work at the Isaldo. They remove the effigy and bring it outside the building. Those townsfolk not under Marsh's sway are marched down to the Isaldo by armed puppets. Those who struggle or try to escape are shot on the spot. Puppets outside the theatre begin ritually executing other locals to Dagon with either an axe or machete as the effigy is raised. As the bodies and limbs start to pile up, more and more are brought forward, with a cacophony of screams, struggle and chanting rising. If any of the agents are held, they are the penultimate sacrifice. At the end of the ritual, the puppets start killing themselves by chopping off their own limbs and disemboweling themselves. Truly a horrifically gruesome scene. The agents, in all likelihood, will find themselves in the middle of the slaughter. The town is small, so escape would normally be easy. However, in every direction, Marsh's puppets are searching for them. Any vehicles they arrived in will be sabotaged. Running into the desert will have a huge risk of exposure. It stresses that time passing should be punctuated by highlights rather than the actual passage of time. Marsh's plan culminates at daybreak. If they call for help, any state troopers that arrive will be gunned down by the residents, and any assembly of the National Guard will take hours, by which time the ritual will be over. It gives a number of events that can happen during the ritual, which include things like spike strips being laid across the roads to prevent escape by car, animals watching them in a strange manner, gunshots to lure them away from their vehicles, roadblocks, locals being murdered in horrific ways on the streets, scenes of mass slaughter, snipers, posses of puppets, and even children with bundles of dynamite in backpacks. It gives rules for how the agents can fight back against the town. March actually controls 307 townsfolk, and once that number reaches 0, the threat is over. Any puppets that attack the agents will aim to incapacitate them rather than kill them, as Marsh wants them alive for sacrifice. Though the situation seems dire, there are options for escaping Mustang. To the northwest of the town are neighbourhoods under construction, and north and northeast are expanses of RV parks. Should they move along the road towards Yuma, they are essentially sitting ducks. Townsfolk will pursue them in cars, trying to run them down, shooting them and then taking them back to the town. Should they go off-road and into the desert, hundreds of townsfolk pursue them, though they can escape. If they go off-road in vehicles, they can drive there to escape, though the dust cloud they kick up means that they are easily followed, and it's difficult to do at night. We then move on to the final resolution. Those lucky enough to survive gain D6 SAN, though it takes a massive cover-up. The programme will evacuate and debrief the survivors, formulating a story around the separatist militia group called the Sons of Freedom, having a running battle through the streets, with super convincing video footage, evidence that is years old, and even a video manifesto. Reports will indicate that ricin was found in the town, which will cause it to be permanently closed for a chemical weapons clean-up. Videos will surface of residents crying into the camera that their neighbours have gone crazy and started murdering everyone. They will have repercussions for years to come. If the outlaws are involved, they'll tell the agents to destroy any evidence that shows that they were there and get out of Dodge. The programme's disinformation campaign kicks in shortly afterwards. After this, we have stats for all involved, including the Marsh Spirit's multitude of powers and the information on how to run the puppets. Also, at the end, we have an advertisement for Dennis Tutuela and Shane Ivy's Patreons. In recent years, the success of Stranger Things has given rise to a number of role-playing games that pay homage to the kids on bikes aesthetic that seems so prevalent in movies from the 80s and 90s. Oblivione takes that aesthetic and turns it on its head, roughly grabbing the innocence of kids on bikes and transforming it into a bloodthirsty take on Children of the Corn with an unhealthy dose of the Wicker Man thrown in. The question as to what happened to the prisoners from the infamous raid on Innsmouth is answered here with aplomb, and you're not only getting a particularly nasty scenario, but also a key piece in the history of Delta Green's doomed world. The murder of the Abril family on the outset is horrible enough to affect even the most hardened of agents, and the author's use of that which is normally associated with innocence, things like young children, infants and teddy bears, and making them a part of this horrific tale of revenge is exactly what this game is about in my eyes. Oblivione is perhaps the most savage Delta Green scenario I've read to date. Marsh is relentless in his pursuit of the agents, and the fact that he gains knowledge of everything in an agent's life and even drags their bonds into proceedings just makes it that bit worse than it would normally be, as their private life is something that often remains directly untouched by dealings with the unnatural. The climax is magnificently realised, and the bloodbath that follows just shows that this game means business, and the fact that Marsh would strap dynamite to children in order to do what he feels he has to do leaves no room for redemption. This is evil in its purest form, and Oblivione is much better for it. My first thought after finishing reading this scenario was, I have to run this for my group, and in my eyes, it is one of the best released for Delta Green so far. My only criticism is that I wish there'd been more of it, as it was gripping from beginning to end. I give it a 9.5 out of 10. Okay, that concludes part 7 of Black Sites. Part 8 in this series will be the final bonus 2-minute terror, The Child.